Good morning, everyone. Our meeting is now live. I'd like to welcome you to today's special committee of the whole meeting. First of all, I would like to acknowledge with gratitude that the CBRD is conducting its business on the unceded territories of the Quetzin, Malahat, Subasset, Halalt, Penelakut, Snuneymuxw, Layaxin, Paquichin, Dididot, and Pachidot nations, whose people have walked gently on these lands for millennia. With that, I would like to welcome Alternate Director Champ. For those in the room, please make sure that your cell phones are on mute. I did indicate that there would be a fine, and I unfortunately levied one against Ms. Boyd, but we have rescinded that fine as it was used as a timer for public hearing, so public input, that is. So with that, I will turn to Ms. Boyd for the agenda items.
Thank you for excusing that fine. We are at one, approval of the agenda. So we have a few changes this morning. We have circulated and republished a report for R10. This is from the GM of Land Use Services regarding Bill 44. So you have that in front of you there. Also on R9, we will remove 7 to 11 in those points. And we have an NB1, it's a verbal from Director Morrison regarding budget schedule. May I please get a mover, a seconder?
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you. I don't see anyone in the gallery, so we will pass on public input period and move straight to reports of R1. Report from the Facilities and Transit Division, Community Services Department regarding 2024 Draft Budget Review, Function 106, Commuter Transit.
Thank you. Do we have staff to introduce this?
Yes, Chair McGonigal, it's Jim Wakeham. I can do it.
Perfect.
Would you like me to go ahead?
Please, carry on.
Thank you. So good morning, directors. Well, I'm not sure how the transit service got the nod to go first in presenting the 2024 budget, so I'm sure you have lots of questions for me. But let me start by mentioning the first two transit functions, which is both 106 and 107, the first two reports, have not had an increase in requisition since 2019. But unfortunately, that nice run has come to an end with our 2024 budget. For the past 4 years, we've had the benefit of receiving BC Restart grant funding re the pandemic from the province, as well as using some of our operating reserves, which were in healthy position. And BC Transit was also able to hold down their maintenance and operating costs to a very low level. And as many of you know, with respect specifically to Function 107, which funds our regular conventional service and Handy Dart, we have not had any provincial funding to support the requested service expansions that the board has approved. So that has also added to our reserves being built up. Which is unfortunate because we've really done a lot of planning work, in particular with the Transit Future Action Plan, our new interregional service connection to the RDN, and more recently the local South Cowichan Transit Improvement Plan. All of these service expansions do require additional local CVRD as well as provincial funding to allow our service improvements to move forward. And hopefully we'll hear in the spring that the 2024 provincial budget will fund these expansions that the board has already approved. And if not, then those savings of the expenditures that are in the 2024 budget will just go back into the reserves. So with the reduction in the provincial COVID funding grant that we received, less use of the CVRD operating reserves, increases to many of the BC Transit expenses, particularly this year, for fuel, insurance, and maintenance and IT, as well as the inclusion of the service expansions that I just spoke of. And for those that don't know, the CVRD has to budget for those expansions before learning if we receive provincial funding. And so it's with all of that, it's forecasted with those expansions and the BC Transit expenses that we are looking at a fairly large impact in the next 3 years. So specifically speaking to R1, which is the commuter service, in order to help reduce the impact on the total requisition in 2024 for both the transit functions, since Function 106, the commuter is in good shape, our fare revenues are increasing, and it's at a fairly healthy operating reserve. It exceeds the 4-month maximum monthly amount by a fair amount. Staff are recommending that we use an additional $180,000 from these reserves in 2024. And that would result in a decrease in tax of about $139,000 or 45%. And so in relation to R2, which is Function 107, The Function 106 decrease is going to help partially offset a 10% increase in Function 107. When you look at both functions together, that will result in a net tax increase of $131,000 or approximately 4.4%. So before I go into Function 107, which is R2, I'll just leave it to the directors if they have any questions on the report or any of the supporting attachments.
I have Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Wakeham. Can you just refresh our memories as to our requirements on replacement of our rolling stock? And I get the rationale for the sort of linking the two functions, but this is the commuter function, which is the partnership with Greater Victoria Regional Transit, and do we have future exposure in regards to rolling stock replacement that we have to be considering?
Mr. Chair, through Mr. Morrison, that's a great question. It's a little bit premature to give you a definitive answer. So for the directors that weren't here, back in 2008, when the commuter service started, the province provided 8 of the buses at no charge. We do not pay a lease fee. So they have another 5 years to go. The intent is for them to be advertised over 20 years. So in 2028 is when on the books they would be looking to be replaced. I know BC Transit is doing a lot of work right now because they're not sure what they would replace them with, electric, CNG, LNG, whatever it's going to be. And I've obviously expressed that notion to BCT that this would be a major hit if after the 20 years that local government, which would be us and Victoria, would have to share the cost of a lease bus. So I know that BC Transit has put forth some preliminary discussions with the province because that was a very unique situation where we were granted those buses for free. So I don't have an answer for you yet, and as soon as I do, of course, I'll bring it forward. At this point, I think we could be fairly optimistic that there'll be some kind of special circumstances that we would hopefully get some preferential funding towards those new buses when they get replaced.
Follow up, Director Morrison?
Well, I guess the question is, for the purposes of this year in Function 106 and 107, I can support the approach where we would decrease requisition here, but I think that there should be an asterisk put beside that for next year's budget considerations, because a 5-year saving window for replacement and for investment in new rolling stock is not that big of a window to be allocating additional funds to a capital reserve or a reserve for reducing the impact of that hit when it comes in 5 years. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, through to Director Morrison, I'll definitely follow up with BC Transit if they have any update on this and what they might be forecasting.
Any further questions on 106, R1? Moved by Director Morrison. Do I have a seconder? Second by alternate Director Champ. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R2, report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding Community Services Department, 2024 draft budget review, Function 107, Transit.
Mr. Wakeham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as mentioned, the increase in requisition for 2024 for Function 107 is estimated at 10% or $270,000. And when we look at the next couple of years, unfortunately, Function 107 will be challenged to maintain the budgets with these low-cost increases. Again, remember, 4 years of no tax increase. When you take into consideration BC Transit's estimated cost increases, which is fuel and many of their other operating costs they have, they're also expecting the bus advertising revenues to decrease, which they have in the recent year. Plus the 3 large increases with related to the 3-year expansions that the board has approved. We're only committed or liable for 1 year at a time, but I do have to budget for the 5 years out. And so all of that with no extra provincial pandemic funding are definitely going to show some fairly significant increases. So in order to help smooth out that impact over the next few years, which again, also assumes that we will get provincial expansion funding, of which, again, for the directors that don't know, local government pays about 55% of that, and the province pays about 45%. It's not quite that simple because there's different amounts for handy dart versus conventional, but it's a bit of a round number. And so staff have drafted the 2024 budget using a little less of our operating reserves than last year. The amount is still substantial. The 2024 budget is suggesting to use 512,000, but even with that, you'll still see a 10% increase. So there is a lot of detailed information in the reports and the accompanied attachments. But again, I'm happy to answer any questions that committee members may have.
Look to the body for questions. I don't see any. Online? Someone like to move this? Moved by Director Morrison. Have a seconder? Seconded by Christash. Sorry, Director Ishtash. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. You got off easy, Mr. Wakeham.
Yeah, I think I'll be back a little bit later, but thank you, folks.
I think you will, and probably not as easy next time.
Thank you.
Moving on, Ms. Boyd, please.
Thank you, Chair. R3, report from the Finance Division, Corporate Services Department regarding 2024 draft budgets to grant functions not previously approved.
Sorry. Director Staples?
I just have to ask that R12 be pulled because I have a conflict of interest as I work with the organization.
Okay, so R12 will be pulled, and we will ask you to leave at that time. What's your pleasure? Would you like to do these one at a time? Looking to the board. Director Douglas?
Mr. Chair, I happen to move the recommendation with all the items with the exclusion of the item noted by Director Staples.
So moved. Do I have a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion on that? Director Morrison?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm fine with the current budget recommendations. The one thing I'd like to, I think I have a question here in that I think that there was going to be some discussion as to some of our flow through and group grants. I got the nod from Ms. Miles Wilson there. I'd just like to note for the chair and my colleague across the way there, Director Deck, that there's a number of items here that have been at static funding levels for a number of years, and there's some kind of unique funding formulas. I'm looking at CATSA Historical, there's a Senior Center grant, there's a number in here. I'd like to just propose that the directors from the West get together and discuss whether or not there might be an opportunity to adjust the maximums that are allowed under these under the current formulas, and not for this year but for next year. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll call the question on all but number 12. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And now we will allow Director Staples to remove herself from the meeting. And please speak quietly. So number 12, Ms. Boyd, is?
Thank you, Chair. Function 494, social planning, attachment L to be distributed. So that's incorrect, or sorry.
Social planning.
Social planning.
Any discussion on that? Do I have a mover? Moved by Director Segal, seconded by Director Toporowski. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. We will allow Director Staples to re-enter the meeting.
You're lucky. And her mic's on. No.
Ms. Boyd, please.
Thank you, Chair. R4, report from the Finance Division, Corporate Services Department, 2024 draft budgets, non-requisition functions.
Do we have a presentation on this, or? Director Douglas.
I'll move the recommendation.
Recommendation has been moved. Do I have a seconder? Director Staples seconds. Discussion? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick clarification on function 150, please. And I'm sure that's Ms. Bowen there about the Library Board MFA debt. I'm kind of looking at an article that appeared this morning about fiscal management at the VIRL. And I'm just wondering how that ties in with the present MFA debt repayments. And that may be a bit of a spring on you, Tracy, I'm afraid, because I've only just seen it myself.
Through the chair to Director Wilson. Yeah, no, I'm not aware of that, but the debt is, we send them invoices every year for the debt that they have to pay back. So that is new. I'd have to look into that.
Oh, okay. And that would mean, I think, just clarify for me, that we actually requisition for VIRL, do we not? Oh, and this is separate, this is a debt repayment.
That's a debt repayment.
Good.
This 150 is a debt repayment, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion, questions? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. R5, report from the Finance Division, Corporate Services Department regarding 2024 draft budgets, environmental services.
Thank you. Director Douglas.
Move the recommendation.
Recommendation has been moved. Do I have a seconder? Professor Justice. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Everyone's done their homework, haven't they? Perfect. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R6, report from the Finance Division, Corporate Services Department regarding 2024 draft budgets, regional functions.
Look to the body. Director Morrison,
Well,
please.
These are some numbers that have some impact on our budget, so I like the speed by which we've been operating so far. I think that there should be some consideration of these as individuals.
Err on the side of discussion. Is Director Wilson, do you have a question?
No, I have some discussion on 285. I'd like to make a couple of suggestions on that.
So perhaps if we work through each one, so function 100, is there any discussion on function 100 or any questions on 100? Director Morrison, I saw your hand, but
I'm just trying to catch up here.
no, all good.
Yeah.
Yes, Director Douglas, sorry.
Mr. Chair, could we get some clarification on what exactly the recommendation is for function 100? Because there are two options in terms of the increase, both of which exceed the 3.5% mandate. I believe one is for 9.97% as opposed to 15.41%.
So I'll turn to staff.
Through the chair to Director Douglas, I will try my best to explain because it is a whole bunch of different departments within function 100, so I'm just responsible for finance.
Ms. Moore, I think I understand the rationale.
Yeah.
It's more just which one.
We're looking for the higher one because on the one that's the 9.9, we've had to cut back a big chunk of training, training and development, courses, conferences, travel, a lot of stuff that for a lot of key positions within legislative services for keeping up on new laws that are coming out with regards to bylaws, and then HR to keeping up on corporate law, and then finance and IT. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we are a very service-oriented department. We're not, so we have some allocation comes in and then some is from requisition. So we've had to scale back. If you looked at the year over year, you'll see that HR is only pretty much covering wages. They've had to cut everything out just to make the 3.5. Some of them, we couldn't even make the 3.5. We still were going to be over the 3.5, just to stuff that happened last year with new positions coming in. And last year, we were only a half year of some of the positions. This year, we're a full year of the positions. So that's why some of the increases from that. but it would be cutting back a lot and would put us in some risky situations if we didn't keep it at the higher level and keep where we're at. That's why the two different ones that we have.
Could I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Oh,
One
think
point I'm
we
not clear
have-
though on is if we pass the recommendation in the agenda, is the, like if you go to the, to the actual recommendation here for, whether or not it
It would be
is.
the high, it would be the higher one, is what
Okay.
we're looking for,
Okay.
is for the higher percentage. And as if you looked at the year over year, you'll see how the board expenses, we had to cut way back on your guys' expenses as well to make that area 3.5. So yeah, we're looking for the higher amount, the 15, yeah.
Can you remind me what the difference is, not percentage, but the actual amount of funds? I might have it written down here
I think
somewhere.
it's, one was 300 and, yeah, and then the newer one was 548. So it's the difference between those two, is like, because the one is at the 9 and then the higher one. So we're looking actually as an increase over 2023 of 548 for the year.
That concludes. So I have Director Segal and Director Morrison. While I have your eyes, is there anyone else on this one? Okay. You certainly can. I'll put you on the bottom of the list. Director Segal.
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Bowen, so I'm in support of option 2. But my question is, and I know, I'm not suggesting we need to really get into operating reserves, but it looks like it's healthy, what's in the report above the max. Thank you for this, the max mins. And so I don't know if there are any trainings that are like one-offs or things that can be eligible to be used, or if we're saving that to use for something else.
Through the chair to Director Segal, there is some stuff that's going to be earmarked for our operating reserves, and a lot of the stuff is continuation. So a lot of people that have designations or certificates and stuff, that we have to do a certain amount of education every single year. So it can fluctuate between what we're doing, so it's not always like a consistent. So it's something that is always every year, so it is in operating reserves. We could use operating reserves for computers, but then those are all small amounts, like they're very minimal. And we are wage heavy because of the service industry that we provide to the entire CVRD, and we can't use operating reserves to cover that.
Okay, I have Director Morrison, McClinton, and Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And looking at the two options, this is one of the most important functions and budgets that we have, and there's a lot of work done and funded through this function. And while I appreciate the option 1 that has been put forward as basically, it looks like it's short shrifting us. I think that if we're to want to be implementing some of our corporate strategic plan and having the horsepower and the capacity to be able to do some of those things are going to come through the services that are funded through this function. I note that the revised supplemental list that we're looking at has deleted a number of HR requests. Is that correct? Yes.
Through the chair to Director Morrison, yes, they are, but they were small amounts, the ones that we took out, so they weren't like significant. Like they were minimal.
Well, still, but the point being that I'm more inclined to be able to support the option 2 on the basis of the fact that you're not going to be, there won't be a large number of supplementals, even regardless of the amount. So this is one where I would recommend that we don't go light on, and that we consider funding this at the level that maintains corporate service level at 15.41. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Morrison. I have Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. My question was about the operating reserve. I agree with my colleague, Director Morrison. I think there's some other directors, especially the electoral service area directors, I'm inching closer in my area to a 20% increase this year. So, I do hope that we can find, savings throughout. But again, having a government that works is the reason we're doing this. My question is just, can you just perhaps elaborate on that balance, which does seem to be more than double the maximum? And how did it get so high? Like, are we certain we need to requisition at those numbers? Perhaps you could tell me what was added to the operating reserves last year from this function.
Through the chair to Director McClinton, I don't have that in front of me, so I'd have to do an analysis on it, because there is a bunch of amounts that go in there, and then there's some that have been earmarked and have been earmarked for years. There's stuff in the Island Corridor that sits in there. There's stuff for the lighter that sits in there. There's the project for the records management that sits in there. There's money still that we have from COVID that is included in this amount, which will be used up in the 2023 budget. So that's part of that operating reserve balance, which will be gone in 2023. So that will bring it down. So there's things that are earmarked. And then there's stuff that happened in 2023 that used operating reserves. It doesn't reflect in this number because this was done at the beginning of this year of 2023. So it's kind of a floating balance, and we don't know what's happening yet with 2024 or 2023 because we're still just starting year end.
Through the chair, thank you for the explanation. That all sounds very straightforward, and appreciate that.
Thank you. I have a first-time Director Wilson speaker. I'll come back to you, Director Douglas.
A bit of a quandary here, Mr. Chair, because we're talking about General Government 100 and the reserves that are in there, 3.9 million or something like that. But guide me on this one, Ms. Boyd. There is an item coming up in closed which seeks to,
I think we'll,
can we not?
no,
you know-
I think we will
All
just,
right, I've got some problems with 101
and
right
then
now.
we'll discuss them there, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Director Abbott?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bowen, for all you've done, you and your team. I preface this with trepidation, and I'll probably, if I'm sitting at this table every budget season, ask the same question. A lot of what's gone into this reporting is premised on the fact that staff levels must not be altered. And I do not wish to be one that suggests that the hardworking team at the CVRD should contemplate reductions in staff. But is there ever an opportunity for serious contemplation to look, sort of like in a business environment, it would be zero-based budgeting. You go back to your departments and you ask, yes, we need new staff for new buses, new garbage trucks, new technology, new computer systems, but are we doing things in a former fashion that could be reassessed, just to look? But if we go into this process year over year with the premise that we can, it's a sacred cow, we cannot question any staff levels, and it's not to say that we would put a percentage that we must hard-nosed, we must reduce by 5%. But just to start the budget process closer to zero and see how we can get to purely, truly justifying why we need the new drivers for the new equipment, the new schedules, the new software that must be on board. And I haven't got the answer. You don't want us at this table delving into the weeds and running your business. But I just worry about it. And I'd encourage people to perhaps read old news from the 50s and read up on Parkinson, Neville Parkinson and Parkinson's Law. It's an interesting observation about the growth of bureaucracies, and we're all a part of it. So I haven't got a solution. I'd prefer, just my gut tells me that we directed staff to go at 3.5%, and there's a lot of stuff that's nowhere near 3.5%. And it means that at this table, it should be more than symbolic. It means that perhaps we don't all go on conference. We don't all travel to Vancouver and stay in really nice accommodations. Perhaps, in preference, 1 or 2 directors go and report back to a board workshop. This is what we learned. Look at the agendas and see what topics are applicable to this area, this region, and we need to attend these seminars, and we need to report back in an inexpensive boardroom right here, and you're both accountable for reporting what you learned on conference. It may mean that lovely lunches like we're going to be served today are a thing of the past, that we become a little bit more frugal. And as I say, I don't wish to be just symbolic, but it starts here at the leadership table. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson, you had a response?
Oh, thank you for your comments, Director. So I think going into this budget process, the budget managers have worked very hard to look at any kind of savings and kind of keeping an even keel and really trying to avoid a lot of the significant increases. But going back to that original mandate, it was very clear from this table, you did not want us to take a look at staffing levels at all costs. You wanted us to maintain, because if we were worried about retraction and reducing of service levels and having a hard time getting staff back, should we want to scale up in the future. There was also a lot of conversation about the impacts of implementing regional recreation and the fact that a lot of the pain we're experiencing is a 3-year period of time, and then it will even out. So we took that all into consideration. But back to your original point, I mean, we can always take a look at adjusting service levels, but we are fairly advanced into this budget process to begin to take a look at that. So I just wanted to reflect on those points. But of course, we're always open to taking a look at how we do the budget process and looking at our service levels for the next budget. Absolutely.
Follow up?
Thank you, Michelle. And I did preface by saying it's with trepidation. Excuse me, Danielle. Senior moment. Chief Administrative Officer. I prefaced by saying with trepidation, because just yesterday we learned of the challenges that HR is going to face if we don't get our head around the warming center and costs. So I haven't got a solution, and I don't relish what you have to do, Ms. Bowen.
So through the chair to Director Abbott, there's also there was a lot of computer costs that went skyrocketing. Some of the licensing just to have the Windows and have PDF and have Microsoft went up like 14% in some places. Insurance went up 10%. We're seeing inflation on gas and just ICBC insurance and stuff like that. So there's a lot of that stuff. Plus we had the union contract, so that's something we have to. So all of those play in to them trying their best to be at the 3.5. And this is we have to do that in 100 as well. And that's where the biggest thing had to be cut. Yeah.
I have a first-time speaker. Director Martman, please.
Sorry, Director Douglas. We keep pushing you down. I really sense, the importance to the corporation on, staying the course of maintaining what it's able to serve to the public. And I think the public has an expectation of that service. And the problem that I come up with is the balance of the whole budget. And the piece that I'm looking at, and this is where I struggle, is what, in my mind, when we get to the supplementals. And so we look at this and I go, I know my area, like Area G, is facing regional recreation and a big increase. So I worry about, the impact of the supplementals if we go with this, because I can't see going with everything. But I know this is core, and I think that's where I would stay with this option 2 at 15%. But I am really concerned about when we get to the discussion later this afternoon. Thanks.
Absolutely, Ms. Wilson. Miles Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just jumping off what the director's mentioning about the supplementals too, I think it's kind of a little bit misleading in actually referring to them as supplementals as a whole package, because, and you'll notice in the report it actually reflects on this, that a good portion of those things are just implementing asset management. So it's not like they're optional, nice to haves in a lot of cases. They're actually important, absolutely critical to maintain our assets. There are things in there too that are tied to your strategic priorities. So I know it's a really difficult task to take a look at that, but it's do we want to fund your strategic priorities, or do we want to hold off a bit and make those investments later on in the term? That's definitely at your discretion. But I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. And I think I can go to my second speakers. I'll go to Director Douglas and then Morrison.
Thank you,
and then
Mr.
Wilson.
Chair.
Yeah, I had a couple questions and a couple suggestions for the board's consideration. One is just with regards to the two options for the requisition increase for function 100. I believe in the staff report mentions that the staff's preference between whether it's the 15% increase or the supplementals, they would prefer the 15% increase. I'm just wondering if Ms. Bowen could perhaps comment on that. Should certainly help provide us with some guidance as we get to the supplementals, and there are several items related to the 100 function.
Through the chair to Director Douglas, yes, we would like to have the core is the main, because that is what we're dealing with right now. Some of the supplementals I can't talk to because they're not from finance. The department would have to talk to them on their significant, on how they will reflect their ability to do their service within there. But yeah, we are looking for the 15 just so that we can stay with the core of what we have right now and keeping up on everything that we are doing.
Can I keep going?
I'll give you one more.
Okay. I've got like 3 questions, a couple suggestions, so you can cut me off.
No, I wouldn't cut you off, but I do have a first-time speaker, so do one more and then I'll go to.
Sure.
Okay, I'm patient.
Well, the other question is just with regards to the strategic investment funds. Like we've got 200,000 budgeted for this year, and just speaking to our CAO, this is discretionary funds that the board has quite a bit of flexibility in terms of how we use these funds in terms of implementing our strategic plan. What I was curious about was how much we spent in terms of the 2023 allocation. And the suggestion I had for the board was, I know we don't want to be dipping into the operating reserves because that can come back to bite us. However, the 200,000 for the strategic investments, those are discretionary funds. We're not obligated to spend that money or set it aside on an annual basis. And in my view, that might make sense for something that we might want to cover with the operating reserves, which on an annual basis, we could make a choice as a board whether or not we're going to fund that line item based on how much funding we have available in terms of our operating reserves on an annual basis. But yeah, so the question was how much is left over in terms of carryover, and then again, the suggestion for the board on how we might fund it in an alternative fashion.
Through the chair to Director Douglas, because we're still in year end and trying to balance that, we will not know what that number is to ensure that everything is through there. But there is already 75,000 of that is earmarked. So there's actually only 125 that was a room to play with. 75 that is already earmarked for a project.
For earmarked for 2024.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to you. I'm going to go to Director Staples, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to just mention, as I feel like every year, it's always good to remember that the way that the system that we're in is set up is that every year it's going to increase. As long as things are increasing in the outside world in terms of costs and expenses and cost of living, increases are something that is part of how this entire system works. And until, as a country, I guess, we're able to change that, we are going to have these discussions every single year. That combined with the fact that our community is growing and we're in that kind of in-between place. We're not a small town anymore, but we're not a big city, so to speak. We're sort of in that strange growth place where you can't quite fit into your, old shoes or your new shoes. And so there's a lot of tension because we have to be preparing for those rapid changes that we're having in terms of the need from community members, the expectations, when we're not quite, look at all just the building going around just where we are right now, all the people coming into our communities and in all of our regions. And so as we go through this process, we have to be thinking of that as well, and that we're building this to support all of the people that we're building to, welcome into our community right now. And so I mean, we face this at the city, I'm sure everybody does in their own meetings, because it's a real tension point, because we don't have everything coming in that we need to sustain that, but we can't stop, because if we do, we get too far behind. And so it's this constant tension point. Every budget system, we sit at every time we do this. It's sort of that conversation of how much do we have to hold just to maintain and just to grow enough, so that we're not too far behind. But the system is always going to perpetuate that until the cost of everything else goes down around us. The cost of this is going to continue to rise. And so I just want to bring that up as we're having this discussion to keep in mind, because there's a lot of expectations, not just of the people who are living here now, but of the people who are deciding to come here, that we have to be considering when we're doing this, and that we need the staff to support those changes while we're in that in-between stages.
Thank you very much, and being cognizant of the impacts to our residents, not only on this requisition, but the outside entities we have no control over, whether it's delivery costs that have gone up 300%, whether it's construction materials who have gone over 120% increase in the last year, supply chain issues. It's like we've gone from one pandemic into another. Every year seems to bring a new entity that we have to deal with. So with that, I will turn to Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Director Abbott, because I smiled when he posed the question, because invariably with every new board, that question will be asked, and as to another way of approaching this, zero-based budgeting and the likes, and I can tell you that great that you posed the question, and I can say that I've watched as we've done a complete review of parks. We've done a complete review of our solid waste. And what's the interesting outcome is we find that we need all of the personnel, the equipment, everything that's in the budget is justified when these in-depth deep dives are done. We have, I'll share this, when we were looking at adopting our corporate strategic plan, I was very close to voting against it, because I viewed it as being too optimistic to achieve, based on the fact that we told staff 8 months ago that we weren't going to work off of 6%, we were going to work off 3.5%. So when a new board comes in and looks at our budgeting, and there's I know I didn't hear it, I want to congratulate the new directors. We didn't hear that they were going to come in and trim all the fat off of our budget, because there just isn't any fat to trim. We did a budget, I'm not sure if it was last year or the year before, where we gave a very tough number for staff to achieve, and when they came forward with the numbers, there was potential reductions in service and potential reductions in personnel. And no, we didn't want that. We didn't want to reduce. We want to be able to deliver the base services that we're providing. So that's more of a 10,000-foot view, but we've asked them to present this budget, and I think we'll find when we get into supplementals that there isn't a whole bunch of optional stuff. There isn't a bunch of nice-to-haves within this budget. So I know that you've got other speakers. I'd be prepared to move option 2 when everybody's spoken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First-time speaker, Director Nicholson, please.
Thank you. I guess that when I was looking at this general government one, I reflected on this is my 3rd term, and I reflected that ever since I started, I've been told that corporate services is underfunded. And I am of the view that if you're going to be delivering services, you need to adequately fund them. So I want us to get to a level where we are doing a good job. We have the resources in place to do it. And I often think that I don't have the information to really understand that, because this is what, I can't even, 8, 9, 10. This is the 10th budget, I think. And so is this right? Because apparently the ones before it weren't. And so it's about the information that goes into developing it. And I often think we would be wise to have a very planned and regular review of our programs and services. And we have done a few, I think of a few things that we've done that have provided me with a great deal of comfort about where we're at. But there are some other areas that I just really I don't know. And general government is one of them. And I guess my question then is this sort of going to be, is this look good if we do the 15 point whatever? Is that good? And then we can just expect this progression as Director Staples talked about in the future, or are we going to see another big leap, do you think?
You've got everybody moving on that one.
Yeah. Did you?
Oh, well, I have something to say.
Ms. Miles Wilson, please.
Hi again. I mean, I think the first thing I'll say is like reiterating what Director Staples has mentioned, is that the inflationary pressures in the system we're in does lend itself to increasing incrementally over time. That's just the given. But the one thing I wanted to mention is that we are in the midst of an organizational efficiency review, which was funded in the last budget. And so that's in its early days. It was delayed a little bit because our consultants were unfortunately experiencing wildfire impacts in the interior. But a lot of the items that they're digging into are related to corporate services and looking at how we can gain some efficiencies in those different corporate services. And so, to your point about service reviews, I think it's very healthy for an organization to continuously do service reviews. And we've been talking about this with the GM of corporate services, actually, who's on leave now for a period of time, about potentially proposing to the board reviewing buckets of services in a regular cycle. And so we have some ideas on what we can bring forwards for the next cycle, because doing a full service review of the full organization is very, very intensive exercise. But I think it would be great if we could just go through different themes and different service buckets, I don't know another word how to describe it, that we would bring back that on a regular cycle, which would be really good for you to understand if we are, as efficient and lean as we can be in those service areas. That's all I wanted to say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just comment?
Absolutely.
That would be exactly what I would be looking for. And if it's a planned thing, I think we can budget for that, and we can use outside people, because often you learn things from, by bringing in outside advice, right?
So when our GM of Corporate Services comes back from leave, that is one of the first things we're going to be talking about, is what to bring forwards for a next round of review. And so although we don't have it here for you today, we will definitely be looking at that, bringing a proposal forwards.
Okay, going back to my list, I have Director Wilson, McClinton, and Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's a couple of really good comments which are coming up here. One of is deliver base services, and something which I've been asking for a while, a review of programs and services, a full service review, which Ms. Miles Wilson has addressed, and that's a good direction to go in. We need to look at all, I don't know, what was it, 192 services or something like that we've got, functions. Again, it needs to be looked at, base services and that kind of thing. But that's, could I ask, please, and I'm going to seek direction here again, if it's possible to sever 100 for the time being, because there is something which needs to be discussed on this which can't be discussed in this forum here at the moment. Is it possible to stop discussion or sever at 100 at this moment, go into discussion at a different forum, and then bring it back again after we've discussed that?
Well, there is no motion on the floor, so we could definitely table this till after that discussion, I believe. Ms. Boyd, would that not be possible?
Yes, Chair, we could move 2 through 10, or we're going through each item as we speak, and we could table and come back to it.
If I could then, do I need to make a motion for that?
Yes, please.
If I could, then I would ask that we table function 100 discussion for the time being until it has been discussed in a different forum, and bring it back for further discussion.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion on the tabling motion? I will call the question. All in favor of tabling? Opposed? That fails. I believe we carry on with the discussion. Do you have a continuation, Director Wilson?
Yeah, can we take that vote again? Because as far as I am aware, if you don't raise your hand to,
You are affirmative in the vote.
yes.
That's correct. So if you are opposed, please raise your hands. And one online. In favor of tabling? We have 4, 5. Motion fails.
Okay, thank you.
You did challenge the chair, and the chair is sustained. A little bit of humor. This is a difficult time because we're all cognizant as taxpayers on the impacts that we're going to make here. So it's a little bit different than a municipality budget. We have a little more leeway within the municipality how we can move funds around. And I don't envy electoral area directors in the least. Carrying on with the discussion, I have Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to maybe not respond, but just, piggyback off what Director Staples said. Growth in a democracy and in a capitalist society is expected. We typically see an average of 2%, year over year. This year was an extraordinary year. We came out of the gates closer to 8% in inflation. But the last numbers I looked were closer to 3% than we are to 5% right now. We're seeing it at the gas pumps. And so I don't dispute whatsoever that growth is a natural part of what's happening, especially in a country like Canada where immigration is so prevalent and people want to live in this area. Just ask that sort of people be mindful that some areas are facing a close to 20% increase, right? And that far exceeds any sort of, my starting point before I looked at anything was, I think, just a touch under 15% growth in my community. And there's because it was a referendum, and my community came out about 40-60 opposed to regional rec, and I don't want to relitigate that. I think people get it, but I am going to be in support of option 2 for this, and I'm here to play ball with everybody. I think a functioning government is extremely important. So just be mindful of there's just a handful of us, but we're facing some pretty serious pressures from our community. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Director Douglas, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, a quick question and then a suggestion. Going through the items line by line, I noticed the legislative services salaries are up 277,000 or 6.79%. Wondering if staff could comment on that.
Through the chair to Director Douglas, not my budget, so I'd have to confer with Legislative Services. Patrick is the one. I believe that there was staff that was hired last year. That was a part-time, or not part-time, but we only did 6 months because we figured we wouldn't be able to hire them. Now this year it's a full-time. So it's a full year, but I'd have to look and see. And then there was a bit of a movement. There was stuff moved out of executive office. Their budget went down. That money went into that budget. So, because they moved some personnel around. Same budget, same amount, but they just moved it within the budget. So, yeah, I'd have to dig more detail into that to see exactly why.
I have Mr. Robbins with his hand up virtually. Please.
Good morning. Just to reiterate what Ms. Bowen has said, or actually, no, it was, who was just talking there? Sorry.
Yeah, it was Ms.
Tracy. Yes, it is a shift of personnel from one division to the other. And so it's not an increase in personnel, it's not an increase in salaries, it's just a shifting on how we have accounted for the existing positions. And so while that area may have gone up, then the other area where the positions were removed, those budget lines would go down.
Follow through?
Yeah, could I suggest a motion, Mr. Chair? And I'm not sure if I should suggest it now or wait for Director Morrison to put forward the recommendation, and I can do it as an amendment. But I can read it out for you.
let's get a motion on the floor and then, and which one are you moving? Number 2? So moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director McClinton,
And could I do the amendment?
and now we can do the amendment, Mr. Douglas.
All right. So the amendment was that the strategic investments of 200,000 budgeted for 2024 be funded through the operating reserves for Function 100.
That's moved by Director Douglas, seconded by Director Ishdash. So that is inclusive in the original motion to utilize the strategic funds within that for a reduction. Okay, everybody understands that? Discussion on that? Director Nicholson.
I would just like clarity on what we spent on strategic initiatives this year and what we were planning to do next year.
I believe Ms. Bowen said there was 75 allocated for this year?
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, 75,000 of it is put aside for Area E for the pathway, is where the 75,000 is coming from, is for the Area E. The rest I'd have to look to see what we spent on this year. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look into the GL to see what was spent.
Clarification?
Yeah, I believe our CAO mentioned we might have about 60,000 carrying over from last year.
So Ms. Bowen could probably speak to this better than I can, but we have a number of requests from outside organizations that have been put on the table for this budget process for the Strategic Investments Fund. So Young Agrarians, there's Miss Barry Dobbin right there, surprise. Do you want to speak to that, Barry? Those.
I think 10 for the land match program, and not the Young Agrarians, and then the EDC strategic plan had some funding within there as well.
Okay, do you want to speak to that then? So
Yeah.
don't get lost in translation.
Okay, so through the chair. So when we're going through the year-end budget and going through all the stuff that comes through, if there's stuff that's to be carried over, stuff that didn't get spent, we roll it forward and it comes from the surplus. We show surplus coming in and then that amount. So if it was 200, this year is what we budgeted for. But if there's 60 and we're rolling it forward, your budget would be 260,000 for 2024. So that would be for stuff with surplus from last year, so it's like kind of a different fund. But then the 200, if you want it to be from the operating reserves, that's how it can be. But I can look into that to see. But yeah, Barry knows the ones that are in there that would be funded for 2024, which I think is,
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers.
No, but the names of what they are.
There was the Young Agrarians BC Land. Sorry.
Yeah.
There was the Young Agrarians BC Land Match program was one, and for 2024, I'd have to confirm the details of which project was in there for 2024. But one of the economic development catch and strategic plan, I believe, was in there for 2023. With those funds carried forward, but I'd have to confirm those details.
Thank you. Director Morrison on the amendment?
I was actually going to oppose it, but in the grand scheme of things, this is probably one way that we can reduce requisition a little bit. I'm reluctant to target this area for any reduction in having funds available, because I attended the VIA nonprofits seminar that was held, and we're going to be getting more of our nonprofit service providers coming to us, and having the flexibility to be able to target strategically a few dollars to some of these service delivery organizations is going to be important. So, yeah, we don't want to be doing this a whole bunch, but I think for the purposes of this budget and the flexibility that we'll have, why not?
Director Martman?
Thank you. I think I'm confused, so some clarity on this, because I gather the amendment is not about funding it, it's about where the funds are coming from. Is that correct?
So through the chair to Director Martman. So yes, that's what Director Douglas has asked. So what we do, we would reduce the requisition by 200,000 and increase the transfer from operating reserves to 200,000. So then you're kind of back down to the 9% increase overall. Because we'd be at the,
Yeah.
because it would be, instead of being the 548, we'd take 200 off of that, and it would be the 348.
And then we're caught up in, and then we're caught up in the idea of the bounce next year.
Yes.
Right? And so,
Yeah.
I think I spoke earlier, not this meeting, about avoiding bounces for next year. I'd rather bite the bullet this year. So I'm not really interested in this vote to turn down this amendment.
Okay, Director Douglas, please.
Just with the notion of it being a balance, these are discretionary funds. We're not committed to providing these at the 200,000 every year. So it's really up to the board to decide whether we want to proceed with this on an annual basis and how far we want to go in terms of implementing our strategic plan. This isn't like we've hired a staff person, budgeted for them, or dipping into reserves to cover it on an annual basis, where we are making that year-over-year commitment. These are, as I said, discretionary funds.
Thank you, Director McClinton.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. And, you know, for me, I just like, get me to year 4, right? Like, we've got 3 years of these massive increases. And I mean, anything we can do is really appreciated. I mean that. So I'm in full support of this. I think it's a great idea.
Year 1 and you're already looking to 4? See some of us long in the tooth people who are looking forward to year 24.
Should I clarify? Because that's when regional rec has leveled out.
Yes,
Right.
correct. And thanks for the clarification. I thought you were indicating you might not run again. So I'm going to, if there's no other discussion, I'll call the question on the amendment first. All in favor of the amendment? Keep your hands up, please. Opposed to the amendment? I have one opposed. Now to the main motion with the amendment. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you very much for the great discussion on that. Miss Boyd, shall we move on?
To 109?
Yes, let's do 109. Your pleasure. Anyone to speak to that, or?
We're at R6.2, Function 109, Emergency 911.
I'm not seeing anyone online, so perhaps what we could do is take a 10-minute break, and then we will return at 9:50 precisely and resume.
10:50.
10:50.
We're live, ladies and gentlemen. If we can have your attention, please. Don't make me use the gavel. Should I? Thank you. The gavel has been used. Director Stone, I apologize. Please, if I do miss you next time, yell at me. As you know, it's difficult watching the room and trying to watch the virtual hands, so again, I apologize. So we're going to move on to 109 and 205, as they're both connected. We have an online presentation, or staff online anyway, for 109 and 205. So let's move to 109, Miss Boyd. I apologize for taking your job.
It's okay, anytime. R6, report from the Finance Division, but we are going to number 2, the Function 109, Emergency 911, and number 5 on your agenda, Function 205, Emergency Planning.
Staff, please.
Thanks, folks. So there's sort of two business cases in your package, I believe. Function 109 is a significant uplift in requisition. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of those is an administrative move. When the manager emergency communications in 911 was created, it was divided between 109 and 205. As we've sort of expanded into the space and really come to understand the responsibilities and the constraints on that position, what we're hoping to do is to move that into 109, which reflects all of the work that our manager of emergency communications in 911, Merrick, does. So that is part of that significant increase that we're looking at. The other one is, as you've already heard and considered, some significant increases in contract for service. So the contract with our 911 service provider, which covers off the ability of anyone anywhere within the region to pick up the phone and reach a 911 operator and then follow through all those steps of dispatch, was entered into a few years ago. The understanding, I think, that we had as an organization of how much 911 is used in our communities, and also that 911 use doesn't appear to be static. Like everything else, it is increasing. So there are contract for services obligations in there which result in a significant uplift for 109. We are working with our 911 service provider to look at that contract and to understand, in the coming months, whether or not there's an opportunity to move to a different billing model. Right now, we are billed per call. And I think in the assessment that we've done, I think 2.5, 3 years into this contract now, it makes more sense to move to a flat rate. So Merrick, on our behalf, is having those conversations. So recognize that this is not close to the 3.5 that the board requested, but does include an administrative alignment of costs into 109 that better reflects the services provided. 205, again, we significant amounts of 205 are operationally funded through grants. I think it was about 58% of our operational funding last year came in through grants. We've started to receive our results from our 2024 grants. It looks like we'll be mirroring that or higher again for 2024. However, in order to sort of maintain the service levels, and I know everyone here has already brushed up against the requirements for the new legislation and the regionalization of the service, and there are costs and increases there. When we looked at areas where we could cut that would impact the requisition, we were coming up against some fairly essential services, some of the training that we offer for our own staff and for our partners in municipalities as well as the public, some costs related to how we provide emergency support services and how we fund our SAR partners. So some serious consideration there to reach 205. If we are able to make the administrative alignment uplifting 109, then we're looking at a viable and what our proposed option would be is a 4.4 for 205. So as close as we can get it, given some of the uncertainties of the new act and regulations. I know I've had the opportunity to speak with you all about the new act, but the regulations are TBD from the provincial perspective. So we are hoping to maintain our current service level at that 4.4 to make sure that we're well placed to take the region through that implementation of new act and regulations.
Thank you. I'll turn to the body. I have Director Morrison. Anyone else? Director Nicholson, Director McClinton. So Morrison, Nicholson, and McClinton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Wainwright. Couple of questions. I'll just toss them out there. Have we seen any movement, or can you give us any update on cellular 911 surcharges, potential revenue on that front? Haven't paid any attention to that recently, but I know that there's always been that push to to increase revenues on that side. And my next question is, and I don't know if this fits in under 205 or not, but I know that the regional district is the owner of, well, I like to call them sprinkler protection units, but I know they're structure protection units. And I'm just wondering if we've looked at additional acquisition of a second or a third. I think they're critical infrastructure for a region such as ours. And has there been any planning for either this year or upcoming years for the acquisition of additional SPUs?
Yeah, so Merrick is online here, and I'll invite him to jump in if I get anything wrong here. I think the discussion around the 911 levy and cellular and things like that, we've seen other provinces at the provincial level move into that space. Alberta particularly is one that's being looked at closely. Merrick represents our interests on many of those discussion committees. What I can say from my discussions with Merrick is that it's definitely something that's being considered, but not yet being discussed publicly in a concrete way. So it is highly likely the province will move into that space in the future, but I can't put any more definition around that. In terms of sprinkler, or I call them sprinkler protection units too, yes, we are looking at additional acquisition. However, we would like to do that after having the opportunity to work with our regional fire chiefs. So we've got our next meeting coming up here shortly around how that asset is managed, how it's maintained, and with the introduction of a second unit, the possibility of using that second unit as a revenue generator. So, potentially having one that stays home and one that goes out into the world is a better solution for us than simply having one that doesn't meet BC wildfire standards currently.
Thank you. Director Nicholson next, please.
Thank you. I was looking at my question is about 205, and I was looking at the report under risks. It says, due to climate change, demographic shifts, and housing pressures, Emergency Management Council has seen a year-over-year increase in demand for services to the region. So my question really is about understanding what the demand looks like and what are we required to respond to?
Yeah, through the chair to Director Nicholson, I think emergency support services is a good example. So emergency support services we deliver on behalf of the province, and that's there for events all the way from an individual house fire right up to a full community evacuation. When we compare our statistics for our emergency support services responses, we are seeing sort of an average of one call a week at that individual family level. We haven't this year had an apartment fire, but in the 3 years previous to that, we've had apartment fires. What we're seeing is that our requirement to, through our staff, support individuals who are not the anticipated recipients of ESS for much longer than we normally would is coming into effect. We are engaging in spaces where we are helping to transition people onto other programs, to wrangle other support services into the situation where they can step in and support. So the program as it's designed on paper doesn't work in our community. We don't have suppliers the way that other communities might, and that's because we're a high user, and our vendors, so hotels, grocery stores, and things like that, got tired of waiting for 6 to 8 months or to a year to be reimbursed for their services. So we run a more independent emergency support services program. I think other areas we have. Due to climate change, we're seeing increases in areas of flooding, which require planning, public communication, analysis, and the training of staff and volunteers. I think our warming center this winter is another example of a space where we wouldn't have predicted emergency management would be, but has taken a significant amount of our time and sometimes time away from other projects.
Follow up?
So just on that point, is this going to be adequate for dealing with this emergency shelter issue that we are facing right now?
I think through the chair to Director Nicholson, I think there are some questions that will be clarified with advancing regulations. I think that when we look at that proposed 4.4% increase, it will allow us to continue to keep pace, but not to excel.
Mr. Elzinga, you had a point on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to that point, as was stated yesterday, that the Cowichan Community Center through the Function 420 budget will be identifying additional impacts and bringing that forward to the board's attention on February 8th and 9th.
Thank you for that. That concludes Director Nicholson. Thank you very much. Director McClinton, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is maybe, I might need finance also to comment on this, but just on the staff report under reserve balances, I see we're, fairly close to the maximum, and perhaps maybe suggest some, closer to maybe a 3-month, average might do for us. And the only, I guess I'd like some clarification on, looks like there's a fairly healthy capital reserve balance. Does that, of nearly $880,000, does that, is that earmarked? Does that give us more confidence in possibly just using a small amount of the operating reserve balance just to, offset some of the growth this year? Yeah.
Ms. Bowen.
Through the chair to Director McClinton, I'd have to work with Ryan to see what costs might be able to use that. Capital reserves can only be used for capital items of purchasing new vehicles and such. You can't use it for anything with operating.
Follow up?
But I guess my question is having, two-part question, is that a healthy balance in our capital reserve? And if it is, does that give us confidence to maybe just be closer to a 3-month average rather than close to that 4-month average? I understand about how important it is to have that operating reserve, so I don't want to challenge that. I'm just curious about that capital reserve balance. Does that give us a little confidence to maybe just use some of the operating reserve?
So through the chair to Director McClinton, what we've, like I've said in previous ones, that we are a bit behind on transferring money over, so there should be money from the operating reserve that actually should be going into the capital reserves to be used for future items. But we would have to discuss with the department to make sure that they don't have anything that they've decided they're going to earmark, not maybe this year, but maybe next year. That I do not know. I'd have to talk to the department and make sure that they...
That concludes. Mr. Postings.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director McClinton. So the capital reserve, one of the areas that we are looking at is future facilities for, and so that funding there at this point in time, we haven't completed the process relating to those facilities, and we're talking about future EOCs, regional EOCs, and so that funding has been set aside for the future development, and then likely that would be complementary to hopefully grant funding. So that funding that's what that has been set at this point in time. And Mr. Wainwright and his team are in the process of looking at a facility review for what that looks like. So everything from 911 communications to storing the sprinkler trailers to also REOC facilities in the future there. So that's at this point in time what those funds have been set aside for, and the plan will be coming to the board in the near future here.
Thank you very much. Any further speakers? Director Markman.
Thank you. I think sometimes we forget to thank the staff. Not often, but I just wanted to thank Mr. Wainwright and his staff for creating this, because I know in my community, when we have a wildfire or we have an emergency, we are looking for that being staff and resources available. So thanks for the work on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Move the recommendation, Director Morrison. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Director Staples. Any further discussion? Call a question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. So that takes care of 109 and 205. Ms. Boyd.
Number 3, function 121, economic development.
Economic development. Thank you. Mr. Reardon, did you have anything, or Ms. Boyd, or Bowen? Bowen.
Yeah, Barry is here to answer any questions that you may have on, because he's also 123 as well. So number 3 and 4 are both from his area.
So we'll tag 2 and 3 and 4.
3 and 4.
We'll do a couple together. Director Douglas, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't want to shorten the discussion if the committee would like to go through each item one by one, but if you'd like, I'm happy to move them all as a block, items 3 all the way down to 10.
3 to 10, but I think we will have one pulled.
Yeah.
I can almost guarantee we'll have one pulled.
I'd like to pull 285.
285, so that would be number 8. Director Wilson.
Yeah, in conjunction with that, I'd like to pull 280, please.
So 6 and 8. Anyone else? Nice try, Director Douglas. On the remaining ones, you would move those?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
I'd be pleased to take that, and a seconder by Director Morrison. So on the remaining 3, 4, 7, 9, and 10. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. So let's go to number 6. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. Function 280, regional parks.
Who wants to start? Director Wilson, I had an inkling it would be you.
But no, I'm not going to try and cut this at all. I think actually, if you recall, Mr. Chair, Mr. Diaz, and I apologize if I pronounce it incorrectly, did give us a presentation not so long ago that there were additional costs being found for the remediation of storm damages throughout the region, which were quite substantial and could only be funded by extra requisition or by dipping into operating reserves. And that's a bit of a worry because it's not going to be a one-off. It's going to happen again in the future. Of that much, we're fairly certain if all the predictions for climate change are come to fruition. So what I'm going to suggest, I know I'm probably going to be sailing against the wind here. I have no objection to the increase that Regional Parks is asking for here. But what I would like to do is actually give them a bit more because we're going to find this. And the only place that we could get this from is by an adjustment, call it temporary, and it's only small, in 285, from 750 to 700. The extra 50,000 would then go towards regional parks. So we would cut down the 750 and 285 requisition for 2024 to 700 and give regional parks that extra money. There would be no increase in overall requisition, but the regional parks would get extra funding to be able to deal with any emergencies which come up. Whether we can do that or not is subject to obviously a vote, and I suspect that there will be a lot of opposition towards that, but it is to me a practical solution in trying to deal with some of the damage that we are maybe facing now and in the future.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Anyone else? No, Director Nicholson, sorry.
I just have a question for staff about the reserves, the operating reserves. For all the park stuff, the minimum maximum seemed like they might be a little bit low if we're expecting much more storm damage in the future. Would you use your operating reserves to deal with that, or?
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, yes, you would, because it would be like a one-time, right now it would be classified one time because you never know when the storm's going to hit or how much damage it's going to do. Like, as the storm of 2018, it kind of came at a weird angle, so that's why it had way more damage than we have in some of the other storms that we have. But we are seeing more and more trees falling and staff having to deal with it.
Right, so I just question whether we've got adequate minimum and maximums for dealing with that.
Thank you. Anyone further? Director Wilson.
It's a good point that Director Nicholson had brought up with the minimum and maximum, and I think the term was used, do we have adequate funds in there to be able to deal with anything that might come on? That is one of the reasons why I brought up this suggestion of perhaps a slight reallocation of funds here.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Well, I would be in support of that if it was like an increase to parkland acquisition.
Director Morrison, I'll turn to you.
My apologies, I had to step out, take call, but I think, this was raised about the, potential impacts of climate change on our parks assets. And the intent that my intention for raising it was that there will need to be resources allocated on a consistent basis. And so, we've already received, I think, emails and correspondence from folks, which seems to be an annual one, on maintaining at the very least the level of funding for 285 for the potential acquisitions. Everybody knows how much land has gone up in value, and I want to maintain that base level of funding in 285. But I think if we were to look at the fact that we have a healthy operating reserve in 280, I think that if there were to be an emergency, it could be covered. But I think we have to seriously look at, I don't know whether it would be contingency or what line item within the budget, but I think we have to make a commitment of a annual amount going into that, just specifically for adaptation and response to climate change disasters in our parks. This is regional. I'm going to be looking at doing that next year in my community parks budget. So it doesn't meet the intent of what Director Wilson is after here to balance it out, but I think we do have to seriously look at additional funds in our parks.
Thank you. Director McClinton.
Thank you through the chair. Yeah, I'm in support of the increase. It's the regional parks, all the parks in the CVRD are well used by everybody. They're total asset and a jewel, and so I'm in support of that. We, for whatever it's worth, we're in the middle of a El Nino. Typically, and it's likely going to last at least probably 3 or 4 years. It's predicted to be a big one. With that typically comes more mild temperatures and seasonally less storms. I mean, we just came out of one of the biggest, I forget the opposite of it. It was a 4-year one, which was one of the biggest ones. Typically with that comes big storms. I mean, I think we'd like to see it a little higher, but I'd prefer to cross bridges when we get to them and sort of see how this year's go. If we're in a spot where we need to add to that, I'd be in favor of that next year.
Thank you. I do not have a resolution on the floor, though. Move 280 as presented, seconded by Director Douglas. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Moving now, Ms. Boyd, to
Number 8, Function 285, Regional Parkland Acquisition.
So I want you all just to stretch. Who wants to start? Director Nicholson.
I'll move the recommendation.
Recommendation has been moved and seconded. Discussion. Director McClinton.
Yeah, no, I just think it wasn't expected to get moved so quickly. I know that we're nowhere near our commitment of 40%, but this is, again, we talked about last year was a split vote, 8-9, I think it was, whatever it was to be split. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to get below the zero. I'd be absolutely in favor in year 4 of reinstating it and increasing it, especially when you consider the burden that's been placed on specific electoral areas. Again, there's only a handful of us, but it just seems to make sense that this is an area where there's significant savings. And, it's not like the areas that we'd be purchasing aren't full of trees at the moment. I mean, I'm not sure what the objective is, but if it's to preserve habitat and then, those areas, that's what they already are without us, having purchased them. So, I'd be in favor of a significant reduction to 285. I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you. I'll turn to Director Wilson, but while I'm doing that, is there any other hands? Director Deck, I see. Director Wilson.
Mr. Chair, it's really nice not to be alone anymore. Thank you. I'm not looking to reduce this at all. That would be a complete waste of time, even suggesting it. I wish I could. I would love to bring it down to a number of 500,000 or something like that, but I know that would be defeated. Basically, I would love to be able to see it reduced by a certain amount so that we can then deal with some of the other suggestions that I brought forward. But if I could bring it down to 700,000, I would love to be able to do that. But in fact, I don't think it's even worth me making the suggestion.
We do have a motion on the floor, so we would have to have that defeated and then move to another one. So I will leave that for now, and I'll move to Director Deck.
As Director Morrison said, land keeps increasing in value, and if we reduce the amount of money that we put aside every year for land acquisition, I think it would put us behind where we should be. And if land is not saved for parks in the future, it will inevitably, I believe, because of the pressures for housing, it will inevitably be, the trees won't be there. So I wish we could increase it even, but 750,000 is what I would love to keep it at. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Deck. I have Director Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be supporting the motion to keep it at 750,000. I just wanted to, I guess it's a question. We received a letter from a resident asking us to restore to the full maximum annual allowable contribution to the Parkland Acquisition Fund as it was approved in a referendum by 2008. I think many of us are aware that that would, if it was funded to the maximum, it would be quite a bit higher than $750,000. But I guess the question is, we're now developing a new regional parkland acquisition strategy. And can we expect that that would touch on appropriate funding levels for future budgets?
I think we have an answer coming.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Through the Director Justice, yes, updating the Regional Park Trails Master Plan strategy will touch on that specifically.
I missed Director Ishtash, so I'll go to him first and then to you, Director Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo my support for this before being on North Cowichan Council and being on this board. It was something that I watched the CVRD and was proud to know that the region was doing that and was adding areas. I believe one area I noticed was the Eagle Heights area, and then most recently, I think, was it not the Small Island Marine Park in Ladysmith, and then as well the other areas we're looking along the Chemainus River. And then it would be nice to see with that strategy coming how we're also not just looking at it as parkland, but creating, I guess it's not crown as a federal term, but in that idea of having it being public land that's going to bring back connectivity of natural ecosystems and those rivers and creeks and drainages and important biodiverse rich areas. So it's something I've been proud that the CVRD does, and I hope the board votes to keep the funding as where it's at, and then definitely look forward to the discussion on the new upcoming strategy to see if we can look at how we're using it, and as well, hopefully the public speaks loudly again that they're, I think it was over 60% or 2/3 in support of doing that full original amount. So thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, and just reaching forward, we did see your thumbs twiddling there, and nothing except that was viewed, so make sure your face is clear when you're speaking. Yes, you. No, all good. Yeah, it's reaching and then forgetting to put it back up. Director Stone, was that your hand or just moving? Oh, thank goodness I didn't miss you. Director Douglas, please.
Mr. Chair, I guess we've discussed at the board previously, the federal and provincial government have announced a commitment to setting aside 30% of our oceans and land base towards conservation purposes by 2030. And I was wondering if staff could comment on that, give us a sense of what percentage of the CBRD's land base has been set aside for conservation purposes through the Parkland Acquisition Fund and also through the provincial government, and how close we are to reaching that 30% target.
Was there an indication that this question might have come forward? How about you, Mr. Farquhar? Would you have an indication on the amounts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, at this point in time, I don't have that on my fingertips. We can certainly look into it and report back to the committee.
Thank you very much. And I think if we take into consideration regional parks, community parks, regional park land acquisition, and set-asides within all entities, that would give us an indication of how close we are, Director Douglas. And a follow-up?
Yeah, I think, I wonder if the environment team might have some insight as well, because I know there was the State of the Environment report from 2010 and then the follow-ups in 2014, 2015, and I do recall there was some numbers presented in there.
So maybe we can have an indication at a future meeting of what that percentage would be, if that would be helpful. Perfect. Director McClinton, did I see your hand again?
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, and again, I just want to be clear, I'm not looking to defund regional parkland acquisition. I'm looking for a bridge to get me to year 4 with regional rec. And, you know, I know we can only vote on this year's budget, but, you know, I don't know if we could put like a 3-year plan where, you know, it'd look like something like 250,000, $500,000, and then $1 million. I'm in favor of regional parkland acquisition. I'm just trying to manage these significant increases that are, you know, hitting my area really tough, and this is an area that we have some flexibility to do something with. So that would be my request to the board.
Thank you. I have Director Wilson again, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm going to be very careful what I say here, because the letter that Mr. Director Justice referred to, we all received a copy of that, but I'm not going to use the word offended, but I'm very disturbed by the use of the term a mere $50 per year. No amount is mere when it comes to the present day at the moment. So I'll leave that one at there. And the parkland acquisition, one of the things that came up in the past, and I hope, and I'm going to reiterate my request here, that in any future acquisition, in the past, all we've been given is, here is the land, here is the cost. Nothing was ever said about the cost of modifications or the cost of pathways or maintenance. In the future, if we are brought a requisition to purchase land, there has to be a factor in of what it will cost in the future to actually do anything with that, because that's going to be a major, major part of the costings that this board will face. So basically, I will be supporting Director McClinton in this one. I think we'll be in the minority, but at the same time, I'd just like to reiterate my request that any future acquisitions include costs that might be incurred going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Deck, if I could ask you to turn your microphone off, please.
Sorry.
Oh, all good. Director Marmon, you had a point?
Yeah, sometimes a little deja vu with this function, because I think I was sitting directly where Director McClinton was 3 years ago, arguing the same thing during a pandemic, that we have, you know, some discretionary ability with this function, and And also, we didn't have regional rec at that time. So, you know, there's the variables that we deal with, I think, create challenges for decision-making. I like the concept of looking ahead and saying, you know, what do you want to fund this over the next 3 or 4 years? I'd be really interesting from staff to say, you know, do we have anything on our radar that would say we're going to, you know, if we did that over the 3 years to get the 750,000 over each 3 years by going to 5,500, a million. I don't know if that's the right numbers, but the idea is there. Are we limiting ourselves? Are we going to miss an opportunity, or is that just crystal balling and you can't answer that? But I'd be interested to see if that would cause any problems.
If they can answer that, I have a bridge for you. Mr. Farquhar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Martman. Yeah, you know, crystal balling is a bit in this, because what we have is we have a long-term plan for acquisition that we're going to be going out to the community, and it's one of your supplementals for consideration in terms of how we go about updating the plan. But it's a long-term plan, but having the capacity to deliver on the plan requires the ability to fund it. And part of the effort to do the plan back in 2006, 2007 with the regional community about what they saw as a regional Parks Trails master plan, and basically an outcome of that involved consideration of setting up a specific fund to drive that program for land acquisition. As we know, land is out there, land's of interest to complete the plan, but land doesn't come across on a regular basis in terms of opportunities. Part of the key component of the plan is around looking at opportunities where there's a willing seller, willing buyer, if we're actually looking to target, as the plan notes, lands that are in the privately held right now. So to look at an approach that was separating out or scaling back down and back up again, and just to share with the committee, the last time around that the committee board made a decision to reduce that funding, it required a 200% increase to that function to bring it back up to $750,000. That was in itself was a significant impact to deal with the board at that point in time. So to look to try and scale down, scale back up, and would that have an impact? Yes, potentially it would, because we can't crystal ball when lands of interest in the plan are going to be coming available. So the idea behind the acquisition fund is to build up sufficient reserves to have those dollars at hand when those opportunities arise.
Thank you very much for a very good answer, and the bridge is no longer for sale. I see Director Stone online, and I thank my fellow colleagues here for pointing out. Director Stone, please.
Yeah, sorry, I know that my audio isn't great here, but I do want to say that there are opportunities perhaps in the near term around parkland acquisition. I can't really speak to it in an open meeting because those discussions are early on. But I know working with a number of the nations in the region, there may be partnership opportunities to acquire lands both culturally and ecologically important in the region, and I would be loath to see us be in a difficult position to work on those partnership opportunities should the funds not be available to do so.
Thank you, Director Stone. I believe I had Director Wilson again, after Director Morrison.
I don't want to get into the merits of the Regional Parkland Acquisition Fund. I think it was a mistake in the year that it was reduced just because of what Mr. Farquhar has just described. This is at the same level as when it came in. Everything has gone up in value. So this, in my view, when it was approved by the public, was a bare minimum. And with all of our other functions, every 5 years, we do a 24.9% increase in the requisition limit so that we can make sure that our purchasing power is there. And we're at the same level that we were at basically when we started. So we've already shortchanged ourselves. In viewing this as a discretionary account that the public enthusiastically endorse. Now, I hear what are, the directors that are suffering from what are going to be fairly large numbers, but these are a result of decisions that we've made. When regional recreation was initially proposed, it wasn't going to be phased in over 3 years. It was going to be a one-year hit. We wouldn't be suffering the slings and arrows of these discussions if we would have done it at the one hit at the one time. It would have been huge. So I'm going to suggest that I was going to ask that the question be called. I think we've debated this sufficiently. I wish I had $1 for every hour that this has been debated over the time that I've been here. It's an important question, but we've been given marching orders, and I would like to see an increase in this so that the purchasing power of this fund is matched with the increasing cost of lands, but at this point, staying the course and supporting the resolution on the floor is what I would encourage my colleagues to do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will move to Director Nicholson after Director Wilson.
Yeah, just a question for Miss Bowen when she's up there. On the assumption that we, let's say, got $4 million in the parkland acquisition and a piece of land came up that was $6 million, that funding, would it be, would that, and we wanted to buy it, would that extra funding come from short-term borrowing, or would it be extra requisition?
Through the chair to Director Wilson, that would be short-term borrowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Nicholson, please.
I just wanted to say that I hope that we really rethink this sooner rather than later. As soon as the regional recreation has leveled out, I think we should come back to this particular function and look at it as a priority.
Appreciate it. Are you ready for the question? Test the floor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? You only have one hand, Director McClinton. Well, you have two, but you can only use one. That carries. Thank you, Ms. Boyd.
Moving on to R7, report from the General Manager, Community Services Department, overview of budget function 390, Regional Recreation Funding Services.
Mr. Elzinga, welcome to another meeting, another day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report is in front of you. Just a few notes for highlights of the report on regional recreation. So, as the committee knows, we're in the second year of a 3-year implementation. The numbers presented include recommendations coming from the Recreation Commissions in November, as well as the usage-based apportionment. There are two other nuances in the function this year. One is some recognition that there is some CVRD administration extending over all 9 regionally significant facilities. And there is a supplemental item put forward to put funding away for the 2027 facility use analysis so that it's not one big hit in that year. And my only other comment would be, of course, my thanks to Finance for all of the time and effort they spend on the calculations around regional recreation.
Absolutely, I echo that. It was a cumbersome task to implement the 3-year program, but we certainly do appreciate it. Those who were financially impacted, the majority of that being spread over 3 years is at least a little bit less of a hit. So much appreciated. Director Abbott, please.
So moved the report.
Thank you very much for moving me along. Moved. I have a seconder. Do I have discussion? Director Douglas to start.
I was just trying to second that.
Okay, so there is no discussion. I will call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Boyd.
All right, report from the Utilities Divisions, Operations Department, Asset Management, Gas Tax, Community Works Fund, Fern Ridge, and Lambourne Estate Water System 2024 Draft Budget Amendments.
Director Nicholson, you're moving?
No, I just wanted to find out where Fern Ridge was.
Fern Ridge. We have someone coming to the podium.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Nicholson, Fern Ridge is in electoral area A, and it is kind of off of Shawnigan Mill Bay Road between sort of Mill Springs and Cary Village area. Yeah.
Director Abbott?
I'd like to move this and acknowledge Fern Ridge for being so generous to Lambourne.
You're very welcome, says the director. So it's been moved. Do I have a seconder? Seconded. All in favor, or is there discussion first? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Got you moving your hands before you should have. That's carried. Thank you very much. Ms. Boyd.
R9, report from the Finance Department, Corporate Services, re 2024 draft budgets, regional supplemental request, and other supplemental requests not previously approved.
Would you like to take a stretch break before we get into this? Because there was some removed from that list as well, if you'll recall. Would you like 10 minutes? Take a 10-minute break?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, isn't lunch in 20 minutes?
I believe it is, so we've already lost some staff, so
Okay.
unfortunately, we'll come back and utilize what time we have before lunch. You can eat any time, Director Stone.